So what we're talking about today is what we were going to be talking about last week before I went to Panama. So I hope this doesn't make anybody too unhappy. But next week, we're going to talk about the data you need, the information you need before you actually buy, and that'll be a kind of a 2-week presentation. So I apologize to anybody, to everybody that we just got ourselves messed up here a little bit. All right, so we're going to talk about JV partnerships. And this was coming about because there's been some questions about raising private money or raising money to do deals, and what is considered a syndication or a security and what isn't. And a JV partnership is not considered a syndication, and it is not regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So I thought it was worth talking about as another way to do deals with other people, with their money and your money, that gets you so that you don't have to deal with the Securities and Exchange Commission and all those rules. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And a JV partnership, you can see, is an agreement between 2 or more people or companies to accomplish a specific business together. So it's not an ongoing business. It's not an ongoing relationship. It is for a specific business. All right. So it can be structured as a separate business entity or simply go out of a contract between parties. So you can have more than one company come in, and together you can form another company. So a good example of that would be when you're buying a property. If it's a joint venture, then basically you're going to form an LLC for that new property you're buying, and everybody's that is contributing is putting money into that LLC, and you set up the operating agreement and you set up everything, so it's going to be a joint venture. So that would be an example of how you can have a separate contract and still have everybody. It's temporary, usually temporarily, and it dissolves after the task is done. But if you're buying a multifamily property, you can be holding that for a year to 10 years to 20 years. So it may not be something that is going to be dissolved after a task, because it's not always just a task. There is generally 1 or more individuals or businesses that are coming together with their own expertise to carry out a specific project. They're frequent in real estate, in media, in technology. So we see them a lot in real estate. So what makes something a joint venture? Or why do people do it? Is generally because it's going to give them access to new markets. You're going to pull people from different skill sets or skills to come together to accomplish something, or to combine resources. And most of the time in real estate, I'm sure you kind of know, is to combine resources. Joint ventures, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, because they can confuse people, because it requires both collaboration and independence. So one of the things that is nice about a joint venture, as opposed to a syndication, is that people are coming in from their own companies, and they all have tasks and a specific purpose, but they almost never have any legal responsibilities to each other beyond the scope of the venture. So if you're buying an apartment building, say in Raleigh, North Carolina, and you've got 6 joint venture partners in that, you have legal responsibilities to that property and each other in relation to that Raleigh property, but not in relationship to anything else you may be doing or other businesses. So your liability or your responsibilities are limited to that one venture. Okay. So here are the characteristics, and a lot of these slides, the next couple of slides, come right off of SEC and or the IRS. So what this says is that parties are legally, sorry you guys, independent with the exception of what they're doing on the project. They set out to accomplish a specific goal generally. This thing that I've highlighted in yellow is key as far as both the SEC and the IRS are concerned. And so I would, if you're going to take notes on anything, I would take notes on this one, okay? That for something to be actually considered a joint venture, that this is not both parties, all parties contribute resources, share ownership of the joint venture's assets and liabilities, and share in the implementation of the project. So with a joint venture, you can't have, you say you have 5 people or 6 people in this joint venture, and you are leading the charge. You can't have the other 5 people put up all the money, because there is a requirement for everybody to contribute resources. As far as I can tell, and when I've talked to my SEC attorney, there's nothing says that they all have to contribute the same amount of resources. Like any deal, a lot of times if those 6 people are putting up different amounts of money, then the ownership can be based on the amount of money they're putting up, and or the can be part of that in some of the that the person doing the extra work to put the deal together can get some benefit for that work. So everybody has to put resources in. Everybody shares ownership in the assets and liabilities. So that means everybody's on the hook for the liabilities. And they're going to share in the implementation, and that's important. You can't have basically passive investors in this who are just putting up the money and then they're not doing anything else. The key with a joint venture is that everybody is involved in the decision making, and everybody is involved in implementation in some way. And so those are kind of the key pieces of this. In a in a deal where you truly have passive investors, and they have different ownership shares. So typically in a syndication, you have people that have A shares and people that have B shares. And the roles and responsibilities of those 2 different shareholders can be different. In a joint venture, you don't have both A and B shareholders. You have A shareholders, and they all have roles and responsibilities. Okay. So a joint venture is temporary, but it can be short or long-term, dissolving once the goal is reached. So in the case of real estate, it's typically when you sell the property or if you refinance it and get a new loan, different financing structures, then as long as your operating agreement says that how you can buy people out or let people out, then you can reformat the ownership in a different way at that point. Okay. So overall, the key is that both or all parties contribute to and share in both the opportunities and the risks. Okay. So we already said this, contributions don't need to be equal. So we can say one party can have 70% and another 30%, or in our example, we're dealing with 6 people, you can have somebody with 30% and the other 5 people with what? So they're 70%. So however you want to break that up, it doesn't really matter. That's for the joint venture members to agree to and to put into the operating agreement their percent of ownership. But no matter, this is another key, how you split contributions and profits, each party is fully liable for the issues related to the joint venture. So unlike syndications, everybody has some liability. So there is no general and limited liability partners that you see in some of these others. Everybody is part of a general partnership, so to speak. The only way to limit the shared liability is to form a legal separate entity for the joint venture, and then whatever you choose to put in the operating agreement can be the way it works. But having said that, we have to go back to this, what the SEC says has to be a characteristic of the joint venture for it to really be deemed a joint venture. Now, there are a lot of people out there who are claiming something is a joint venture when it is really a syndication or it is really a security. So if you want to avoid the possibility of getting in trouble, everybody that's part of the joint venture has to have responsibilities and has to put up some assets. So you saw the requirements there. Although a joint venture doesn't require that you form a separate entity, many businesses choose to take this route. And I actually think that it is something that's probably a wise thing to do. Now, having said that, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm only telling you from my perspective and my reasoning, but you would want to check this out. Is that for what we just said, is that if you set up an operating agreement, in that operating agreement, you can lay out the who's involved in capital calls, if there is one, the percent ownership, so therefore the percent of assets that may come and how their portion of the liabilities if something comes. So there's a lot of reasons to do that. And if we're buying real estate, we probably are going to form a separate LLC to hold that multifamily property or that self-storage or whatever we're buying. And then the members of the joint venture come in as owners of that under their own company names. Okay. So this is kind of what my thinking, and not actually a requirement, but I'm going to tell you why I think you do need this. You need a written agreement, much like in a syndication. An SEC attorney is going to do the syndication documents with the operating agreements. In a joint venture, I think you need to have an operating agreement that each party is committed to, because once things start to go sour, or if things start to go sour, everybody starts arguing that it's somebody else's issue and somebody else should be paying more of this. And so having the rules set up in an operating agreement before you go into it just saves a lot of headaches on the backside. Although a contract isn't legally required, I think it's the best way to ensure each party is committed. So it doesn't have to be a contract. It can be an operating agreement, but because most operating agreements in commercial real estate, at least, everybody is signing that operating agreement, that they know what it is and that they are in agreement with it. Okay. Generally, these agreements are going to specify what each party is going to contribute to the joint venture. Now, not everybody has to contribute the same thing to the joint venture in terms of money, time, tasks, all of the different kinds of resources. But you should be sharing out or specifying out. And if we remember back, what the SEC is saying is that everybody has to share in putting up money, and share in assets and liabilities, and share in the work. So your agreement needs to lay out who's going to do what. Now, there's nothing that really says everybody has to do equal work. So that may be a way that if you have somebody who really wants to be passive, more passive than anything, that and they're going to put up a good part of money, that you still lay out what they're going to be responsible for. They still have to have tasks, but it doesn't have to be the same amount as everybody else. Okay. Without a written agreement, joint ventures can fall apart and do fall apart because of disagreements, right? So it is really worth it to do a draft contract and or operating agreement before you kind of get into this, right? One of the things that is clear is that every member of the group, of the joint venture group, has to be involved in the decision making. Because if you remember, one of the things in the Howey decision, which is what makes something a security or not, is that last bullet, which is if it's a security, the last bullet is that everybody else expects the issuer to that the other members of the group in a syndication are not involved in the decision making, so that the issuer is making all the decisions for the passive investors, and that's what trips it over into being a security. So for a joint venture to not be a security, it means that everybody has to be involved in the decision making. Okay, so here are the key, these are just the headline bullets from the SEC page. It's an express or implied agreement for a common purpose that the group intends to carry out, shared profits and losses, and each member's equal voice in controlling the project. So those are the four hallmarks of what when you read through everything that the SEC has written on this, these are the four commonalities, the four big bullet points for a joint venture. All right, that's what I have here for joint ventures. I'm going to just kind of, you've seen this, most of you have been here before, but let me just kind of run through this pretty quickly. If you want to see more about our multifamily and what we're doing in it, that passive wealth webinar is free to everybody. And so you can go in and you can look at it. And you can sign up for the time, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to just sort of see what is on our website, You can look at passivecashflowforlife.com and what we do. If you have questions, you can go to support@passivecashflowforlife.com. And most of the time that's James will answer your questions. The other thing is that, so this is Tuesday. Generally by the end of Thursday, this Teaching Tuesday will be up on our YouTube channel, and that's where you can see what the YouTube channel is. We also have a playlist of all of our other Teaching Tuesdays, so you're welcome to go look through those. We have weekly calls on Tuesdays at 6:30 every Tuesday. Now, we will not have a call on the 4th of July is Tuesday, so we are skipping that Tuesday. But every other Tuesday we're doing it. And then you can just also watch this on YouTube. So those are the main things that I want to talk about. The next 2 weeks, we are going to talk about basically data and information you need. So it's more financials, more focused on financial information that you need before you get into buying something. And I'm sorry I didn't get those slides done in time for us to do that tonight and next week as was advertised. But frankly, I went to sleep when I got home and I woke up late. So my apologies. So now I want to ask all of you folks a question. Every fourth Wednesday of the month, we do a longer meetup. And it's a live meetup, but we also record it and put it up. So we're trying to come up with a couple of topic ideas for this coming Teaching Tuesday. James, do you have the date for that Teaching Tuesday? Not Teaching Tuesday, I'm sorry, for our meetup, which is the fourth Wednesday of the month.
Yeah, give me a second, I'll pull it up.
All right. So this one tends to be longer. So we generally have a presentation for an hour, a little more. And so my question to you, have you got any topics that you would like to suggest that we talk about? I would really appreciate some ideas. We've been doing this for about 4 years now, and I'm running out of ideas. Or we can repeat something if people want to hear it.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, this is Marissa.
Hi, Marissa.
I wanted to know if maybe we could probably discuss scaling, how you could scale.
Okay. So you're talking about this for like the meeting, the meetup?
Yes.
Okay. So when you're saying scaling, you're talking about how do I go from 4 or 5 units to 6,000?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, the rule one is that you find a psychiatrist that you like a lot.
Okay. It doesn't have to be all all at one time, but I just want to know,
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
people get stuck, even on the residential side, you kind of get into a space where it's like either you run out of money or for other various reasons you kind of feel like you're stuck. So I
Okay,
know,
that's a good one.
yeah, I know there's a rhyme and a reason to that, but I know that you all know how to get out of that rut. So
All
that's my
right, that's a good
suggestion.
one.
Thank you.
And then Omar says, seller owner financing, how to find the deals, analyze. So there's like 3 separate topics there.
Well,
All right.
I mentioned one, really just everything around seller owner financing. I mean, just I guess raising money and all that is part of it. It's just with everything, with the market being the way it is, interest rates being high. Of course, owner financing was always attractive, but even more so now. So I just it looks like maybe 3 topics in one, but really everything around seller, anything and everything related to seller and owner financing.
All right, well, we can try and do something that works a lot of times better in residential. In commercial, you tend to see seller financing on more distressed properties, where people who are interested in buying it can't get a conventional loan because nobody will loan these days on distressed properties. But that's a good topic too. It's a good thing to talk about.
Okay.
Other
Thank you.
ideas?
Yeah, Gene typed in, how to buy right for the upcoming downturn, do's and don'ts that are putting others in harm's way.
Okay, say that again. I'm sorry, James.
How to buy right for the upcoming downturn. What are some do's and don'ts to keep people out of harm's way?
Are you talking about buyers or residents?
Yeah. Hi, Nicole. How you doing? It's Gene. Hi, James.
Hi.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, I think like with the topic at hand, everybody thinks that the market's about to take a major downturn.
Yeah, I
And
do
so,
too.
bingo. Yeah. So I think in dealing with the topic at hand, how should we buy how should we buy a multi-property? What should we look for? What are the numbers we should look for to make sure that we're buying right so that we can sustain another downturn, right?
Okay. So so buying it in today's market or with kind of what's coming down the pike in mind,
Yeah,
so to
and
speak. Yeah.
and it could be like a series, like for example, not just one topic, but several things. Like so, how conservative should we be with our say cap rate or cash on cash or other like do's and don'ts, i.e. lesson learned from people that are now in trouble, selling their properties because they bought wrong, and do's and don'ts from that. That's what I meant by the do's and don'ts, learning from other people's mistakes.
All right, that's a good one.
Yeah. And just probably to say what Omer, I mean, sorry, I'm botching up your name. What comes to mind about seller financing in the commercial world? Master lease agreements,
Yep, yep,
probably.
yep.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
All right, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking we would do for things in trouble in the commercial world. Is master lease is a really good way to think about it.
Yep.
All right, any other ideas? All right, well, those are three really good ideas. We may actually be doing a couple of those over a couple of months. So certainly, what day is our June meeting, James?
28th, I'll put it in the chat as well.
Okay, great.
And that's
So
at
I got to tell you, I'm going to Scotland and Ireland for July. So I won't be around for the July meetup and some of these, but I will be doing the Teaching Tuesdays, God willing, and the little people don't get in the way of my internet over there. Um, but I won't be at the meetup. So we'll try and figure out. But between those two or three, we've got at least two or three really good topics for the next month or two. All right, so let's turn back now. And has anybody just turn it over for Q&A related to anything related to raising private money or anything else you want to talk about? Who's JL? The leprechauns better keep their internet going. Yep.
That's Jane.
That's James. Okay. Yep.
So I had a question that I'd had before, and maybe other people can kind of get some value out of it. So you get into a joint venture and you have 4 people in the joint venture, and you need to make a decision on time to sell, you're going to redo the roof, whatever, some relatively large decisions. And you got 4 people, and 2 want to do one thing and 2 want to do something else. Is there a way in an operating agreement to say, hey, that's great, but the final decision based on that, if there's a tie, will be X, or everyone gets a certain percentage of their say? So these 2 people each get 25% of the final solution, and then this one person gets 50%. So both of them would have to agree to match the other 50%, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think you could actually do it either way. And that's why one of the reasons for an operating agreement, you can sort of say everybody's vote weighs however you want it to weigh, or you can say, now that can get kind of dangerous, because if you're the one that's putting the deal together and doing a lot of the work and have the knowledge, then and you're likely then to be putting up the least amount of money. So having all the decisions made by people who put up the most amount of money, but may not know the business or may not have been doing the work, can be an issue. So the other way to handle that is to have in your operating agreement somebody designated as the managing member or the managing manager, somebody who is kind of designated as, for the first 2 or 3 years or however you want to do it, the person who, if things come to loggerheads, makes the final decision. You cannot set it up so that that person makes all the decisions, though everybody has to be involved in discussions and decision making. But you do need to have a way to, if something becomes a tie, how are you going to break that tie? That was a good question.
Good answer.
I had a question. You may have,
Sure.
I jumped in a little late, so I may have missed this, but JVs, when is it a good idea to do a JV versus, the typical GPLP situation?
So the issue here is that one of the reasons we did this is because when you are making the decisions, or your managing committee is making the decisions for a bunch of passive investors, and they're depending on you to make them money, it now is a security. And you have to follow one or more of the exemptions to security laws. And
Okay.
so it really depends. If you have a lot of experience and you have experience raising money, then syndications are a good thing. It's a good way to raise a lot of money, because a lot of people who are high net worth, frankly, don't want to be involved in making a lot of decisions or being involved in a JV partnership. They just want to put their money in a place where it's going to make money for them, and to get reports now and again. But then you are needing to make sure you know the SEC rules and regulations and do things according to Hoyle, because you can get in a lot of trouble otherwise. So I don't know, in general, if I had to generalize, if you're raising a lot of money, like 5, 10, 15, 20 million for something, you are probably going to have better luck doing a syndication, because you can find people with high net worth who are going to likely put more money up, as opposed to smaller deals where people are wanting to be involved, and you have a bunch of folks who are going to want to put some money in. So that might be putting a bunch of real estate investors together with a doctor or two, or a dentist, or somebody who wants to learn about investing. Then a joint venture is a pretty good way for them to learn, and for everybody to kind of be involved. So it's kind of deal by deal. I find a lot of newer multifamily or newer commercial investors are concerned about getting in trouble with the SEC. And so that's what brought this up. So we had a way to talk about what can you do that doesn't trigger the securities laws. And a joint venture is probably the only way to do that if you need more than one investor in a deal. So one investor on one property, and you can probably pretty safely do just a debt agreement because they're going to be in first position, et cetera, et cetera. But once you start having 3 or 4 or 5 investors attached to one property, somebody ends up being the 3rd, 4th, or 5th person in the lien position. And that is probably not tenable, and you probably have a security and you're just not calling it that. Did that, I know that was non-specific, but did that get at what you were asking, Gene?
Yeah,
Is it,
yes, it does. Thank you so much. Yep. So anything under like really 3 million, 5 million, and more than one, yeah, yep, it'll joint
yeah,
venture
it really
probably.
depends. If you have people who you can raise private money from who have a lot of money, then 3 million, it isn't, I wouldn't focus so much on the dollar amount as
Okay.
as who those investors really are and how comfortable you are as the issuer with following SEC rules and regulations.
Okay. Thank you.
Something that I also noticed is, correct me if I'm wrong, Nichole, but it seems like sometimes if you don't have a lot of credibility and you're starting out small and you don't want to do a syndication because a lot of people maybe kind of know you but don't really have a strong relationship with you, it seems that a JV opportunity might be something that might be better. You also save the 15 to 20 grand for all the paperwork when you do a syndication. The downside is that if you get into a JV, you're basically married to these people for the next 5, 6, 7 years. And so hopefully you pick the right people and you don't get anybody that's going to make your life miserable for the next 5, 6, or 7 years.
Yeah,
Those are good points, James.
yeah, exactly. Thank you, James. Yeah, the price and then being married to these folks and have to come to a consensus for every item sounds like a nightmare.
Well, you can structure it in your operating agreement so you avoid some of that. But yeah, I mean, at some point, these are your partners, and if you get a crazy person or whatever it is, they can make your life miserable.
Well, that's why you also have some ways in these operating agreements to buy people out or to get rid of them in after a certain time in a certain way. So I mean, good operating agreements cover some of those things because I got to tell you, almost all deals you have some kind of tension once you get more than 3 or 4 people in a deal. All right, other questions about anything else that you'd like to talk about?
Hey Nicole, I'll ask one. Just from whoops, or double mute. I have it muted.
I can hear you.
Yeah, we have feedback, I think.
You still have feedback.
Okay.
Hold on. Okay. We have both computers on because the PowerPoint's on the other one.
Okay.
Just from going from residential to multifamily and then trying to find private lenders for the multifamily. What do you need to partner with somebody on a couple multifamilies? And I'm just talking like small units, 4, 5, 6, because they seem to be falling in our lap here lately.
Are
Is it
you
bet-
talking about you want to begin to build relationships, or I'm not, can you just kind of frame that a little bit differently?
Sure. If you're looking for private money lenders
Uh-huh.
for multifamily and you've only ever done residential, is it better to partner with people initially? Yeah, I'm talking small units, 4, 5,
Yeah.
6, 7. Is it better to partner with people who have done multifamily, or is there that much of a difference?
If you're talking small properties, you know, and I would say 10, 15 units or less, you probably don't need to partner with somebody, particularly if you're going through some of our class like we have up there, because there's about 60 hours of education there that kind of goes through a lot of things, and you don't have quite the same depth of work with a smaller property do with a larger one. The benefits of partnering with somebody, on the other hand, is that they do have some experience and can point out some things. But you guys are experienced investors. I know both of you pretty well. And so there are significant differences between residential and commercial. But if you pay attention to where those differences are, then it's just a matter of focusing on those differences. And I don't think you have to have a partner at all um, in a small multi. If you were telling me you were looking at 100 units or 80 units or better, I would say, yeah, that's probably a pretty darn good idea. But small, 10, 15 units or less, I don't think it's necessary unless you want to start building your team out and building some friends and some networks in that area, networking. That answer that?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You betcha.
Raj
So
had
I'd love,
asked,
go ahead, James, sorry.
I'm sorry. So Raj had asked for a reference for, I'm guessing you're talking about a syndication attorney, Raj. So I put one that several students have used and seem to have had great success with. Now he does syndication specifically. I'm not sure if he does just plain real estate law. I would suspect he does also, but his specialty is syndications.
Are you talking about James Lawler, George Lawler?
No, actually, I was going to ask you if he's still doing that. I put in Brian Gallagher that had come to speak at one of our functions, but do you want me to put George Lawler up there
Brian,
too?
I think Brian would be good. He does more real estate. He also does some syndications, but George Lawler is my syndication attorney.
Okay, I
Now
think
he does bigger deals, but that's what he does, and he's as good as they come.
you okay if I put his stuff in there?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
So when you are doing multifamily, does these attorneys also do like other paperwork or just the SEC paperwork?
George Lawler is pretty much SEC, but part of what they do with the SEC is they do all of the blue sky stuff. They do all of the reporting to all of the states. They do operating agreements. They keep track of your investors, of what they say they're going to investing. So they do a lot of they keep control of the contracts for your multifamily investors, because the member interest purchase agreement is basically a contract between you and people who are putting the money up. So they do a lot. Do they do the closing on a multifamily? Most of the time, not. Most of the time, if I have George will do all of my SEC work, and then I find an attorney in the state and or town where my property is located to do the actual legal work, to do the closing and that kinds of stuff and get things recorded. Brian, I do believe, does a little bit of both. So I think part of it, what I do think is that if you have a property in Ohio or Indiana that's a multifamily, then you need an attorney who is licensed in Indiana to close on your deals and to do those kinds of things. I wouldn't use a local, a Maryland attorney to close on a deal in a state where he is not licensed because he doesn't know some of the ins and outs of the laws of that state. So, so I would suspect, and frankly, a lot of, now Brian being different, but a lot of real estate attorneys don't understand securities and exchange law and what's actually required. So they're two fairly different areas of law. Did that sort of answer that question, Raj, that you were getting
Yes.
at?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So now, and a follow up to this, like, I want to
Sure.
review my rental agreement that I use for single family. So which one of these would be a good attorney to see, make sure it has enough protections and enough details for evictions to make it easy? Basically looking in Virginia, does any of these handle?
I'm quite, did you get that, James?
No, I'm sorry. Are you looking, well, are you
No,
looking
I want to
for,
review my lease agreement with an attorney to make sure it has enough details to cover myself.
so you're asking if there's an attorney in Virginia that we know that can review your lease agreement?
Yeah, in Virginia, or whether Brian also practice in Virginia. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I am not sure. Anybody on here from Virginia that has a good real estate attorney down there that they would recommend, feel free to put it in the chat.
The other thing is that I would do is that one of our colleagues runs the traction RIA that works out of Northern Virginia.
Okay.
And they would know some good real estate attorneys. The traction RIA actually probably has attorneys that are part of their group. So I would look up the traction RIA and just give them a call.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah.
Other questions?
Yes, the same question for Maryland, Baltimore area. Someone that can look over the lease that I have.
Brian might be able to. I would also say that Brian Gormley, and so yeah, and then Brian Gallagher. I know he's also an investor. So so some of those guys might be able to help you. And if you are looking for other attorneys, you can stop at the Real Deal meetup and Charles Blair, ask him. You can talk to Joe DiMaggio over at the Baltimore RIA. I have to tell you, I'm much more solid in commercial real estate anymore than I am in residential. And Maryland has changed a fair amount of its rules recently. I mean, it's just not a landlord-friendly state, so you really do need to know what you can and can't do in Maryland. Virginia is a whole lot easier to work out of, at least in my opinion, than Maryland. But so probably less critical that you have a lease reviewed in Virginia, although I would do that anyway. But Maryland, I think you really should. You really should.
Thank you. That's great.
I put Brian Gormley's information up there too. He's actually an instructor on one of the other platforms, Virtual REI Academy. So he's very investor friendly and he's a very strong investor himself if you want to reach out.
Yeah, he's an investor too. So yeah.
Yep, got it.
So what I don't think we want in general, and I'm putting on my residential hat for just a second here, is what you don't want are real estate attorneys or title companies that are focused on the traditional ways of working with realtors, you know, where you're going to go get a loan through a bank, et cetera, because they don't really understand what we're doing and some of our structures. And so finding real estate attorneys and or, you know, title companies, et cetera, who really know the investing side is really worth spending a little time getting to know them and getting them on your team. Because I can't tell you the number of times I've almost had deals blow up in my face because an attorney didn't really understand what we were doing or how we were doing, and they were appalled we weren't going to go get a loan. All right. Who else has a question? Marissa?
Yes, I have another question. While you still have on your bit of a residential hat, the numbers that you run on the commercial, where you take out the 10% for the vacancy and then the 45 to 50% for the expenses, are those numbers still the same for residential, or should I be using a different matrix of numbers?
You know, part of it is going to depend a little bit, but in general, with residential, what's most important is that you do not use comparable numbers. You have to use what a house will rent for or a unit will rent for.
Okay.
Because so then you figure out what your 12 months of income would be for a rental.
Okay.
If it was occupied all the time. So what is the potential gross? And then I always, when I'm doing it in my head, I take 50% of that away for expenses, for taxes, for insurance, for interest, for management, for all of those other things, and to have a little bit of buffer.
Okay.
And then you have to figure out that the other 50% has to pay the mortgage and the interest on the mortgage and put some profit in your pocket.
Okay.
So
So it sounds like you still use the 10% vacancy and the 45 to 50%
yeah, except that I
expenses.
don't try and break it out very much. I just use a 50% number. Most
Okay.
of the time that covers it. Sometimes it's more than necessary.
Okay.
But if I'm trying to negotiate something fairly quickly, right, and I don't want to have to go look up what each of those actual numbers are, then 50% is pretty safe. But
Okay.
instead of using a comparable as my basis, right, I'm going to use what the rental income could be and figure out if the numbers are going to work based on rental numbers. And that's as much as I can pay. Once I sort of get to that 12 months of rent, right? I'm going to, you know, my need to be able to cover all of my expenses plus the mortgage and what they're asking for what their asking price is. So let me say it another way. So if their asking price is $600,000 for a 4-bedroom house,
Okay.
then you have to know what the mortgage and interest on the mortgage would be on that $600,000 house,
Right.
right? And then you have to know what the rents would be and to figure out if a monthly rent is going to cover a monthly is going to be 50%. If the mortgage is going to be less than 50% or about 50% of the rent. And most of the time it's not. You just can't make it work, which is one of the reasons we're generally not buying in a traditional way, particularly in primary markets.
Okay.
So Baltimore City, some of, you know, the Baltimore County, but some of the more rural counties, you can find things that actually work, but generally not in the DCs and things like that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
I'll bet you Jane and Sharon, they're coming up really quickly and they can be able to explain that a whole lot better than I did just recently.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All
Mhm.
right, I think we have time for about one more question. If not, then I'm going to, our partners over in the residential side, Jane and Sharon also do Teaching Tuesday, and we're turning this kind of over to them. If there are no more significant questions, if there's no more hot questions that somebody has, then let me stop sharing, and I'm going to let James introduce